closed. So, so I'm gonna share what I know about starting seeds and a lot of about starting seeds in your house versus in your garden. Leave it at that for now, because I want to go through some housekeeping. So we're on Zoom. Some people may have used this a lot. Some people may be on this almost all day right now due to working from home. But I want to just share that likely you'll see, I wrote bottom left, right corner. It's actually bottom left. Likely you'll see in your bottom left corner buttons to mute and unmute yourself. For this, we're going to keep everyone on mute for now, and questions can go in the chat box. So that chat box is, can everyone take a minute to find their chat box actually? And you can, if you want to write in there what your favorite vegetable to eat is and what your favorite vegetable to grow is, if you have experience with that. So everyone just take a minute to find your chat box so that you know that you can do it and that we know you can ask questions, and just let us all know. And then you can see each other's answers as well. Ooh, okra. Oh, right, Molly, of course. Sweet. We've got a lot of kale, chard. Ooh, Brussels sprouts. And green beans. Great. All right, so is that, I don't know if that was everyone here. I think so. I think everyone wrote who's on the call. So it looks like, so we'll use that chat box if you have any questions. And I have certain like good stopping points after different topics that Molly and myself will look through that chat box and answer the questions that you have. And then it's probably in the top right, where you see people's faces, you can change like the view that you're looking at. There's like a gallery view where you can just look at the people. Likely you'll keep it in speaker view because that will mean that you'll like see my screen or me talking. So that's our housekeeping on Zoom. And now, so a little bit about myself. I know some of you, I don't know all of you. First of all, I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I grew up in Colorado. I learned how to farm elsewhere, mostly on the East Coast, and then moved back here 6 years ago after farming, actually also in California, but sort of growing food and growing vegetables was like has been my main thing since about 2000, I think since 2007. Moved back here 6 years ago, and I managed a commercial cut flower farm and got the farm going at the JCC. And now I just have the JCC thing because it's good to focus and keep things simple. But I am going to lead in a few weeks. There is a class just on the backyard bouquet. If you want to delve specifically into learning how to grow flowers in your backyard in addition to fruits and vegetables, because they're beautiful. And then you don't have to have pesticide ridden plants from South America shipped here to beautify your home. All right, so today we're going to cover mostly seed starting and basically when you should direct seed something into your garden and when it's best to grow something from a seedling or a start. So I use the term start and seedling pretty interchangeably. And then because of that, which vegetables are best for each method. And then I'm going to send you all, anyone who registered for this class, I'll send the spreadsheet that I have of it's a cheat sheet of growing in Colorado. So, when to plant things outside, how long they need it inside, that sort of thing. And then And so we'll just go over that and I'll show you like how to read it, what it all means. And I also wrote in there my favorite varieties that I've grown here in Colorado and why I chose them. And then I'm going to show you videos and different aspects of seed starting in the Milk and Honey Farm greenhouse and in my dad's basement, where we've had quite an extensive setup, especially before Milk and Honey. So like before that farm even existed, everything was started in the basement. So I'm going to show you that because I think that that system is very transferable to any little corner of one's household. All right, so we're going to start with a video. And actually, I just realized I forgot to share my computer sound, but here, now I shared it. So this should come up. You guys should hear this pretty well. If you're not hearing it well, write in that chat box. But this is just sort of a video on a big picture direct seeding versus, oops, let's see, play, versus planting a seedling. All right, so this is a video of showing you the row of cucumbers that we planted, oh, it was a few weeks ago now. The soil is still sort of cold, so they took a bit of time to germinate. What I wanted to show you was how big, if we come and look behind this one, there's one that germinated a little later, and so it only has its cotyledons, which are the name of those two leaves that are inside the seed. That bigger leaf that's heart-shaped is a true leaf. That's what the rest of the leaves look like. But when they first come out, they just have leaves that are different than their true leaves will be. And those leaves are actually inside the seed. They're pretty big on a cucumber. Anything in the cucurbit family. You can see my fingernail. So when they germinate, they're very easy to see, and they very quickly establish themselves so that they're gonna shade out weeds and outcompete. And that's one of the reasons why it's so easy to direct seed a cucurbit, a cucumber, a melon, a squash, a winter squash, anything in that family. The other reason why we direct seed them is because they really don't like to have their roots disturbed. So one year I planted side by side a cucumber start that I had started under lights in my basement next to direct seeding them, and they fruited within like a half a week of each other because the plants that I had transplanted went through what's called a transplant shock, meaning they took a long time to establish themselves and start to grow again in the soil. Now that I showed you guys these two next to each other, I'm gonna show you that I'm actually pulling this guy out because you gotta thin in order to get big enough plants to have good production. You have to thin them. So these cucumbers are in a line. They're just about a foot apart from each other. And that's a pretty good spacing in one bed for cucumbers. All right, so that video touched on some reasons to direct seed something. So things, when you're thinking about whether or not to direct seed a plant into your garden or buy a start or grow a start, I'm thinking a lot about how it's going to do outside if I were to just plant it. So the reasons to direct seed something versus actually to plant a seedling, I think I may actually want to start on this slide. So the reasons to plant a seedling are a start. You can get a jump on the growing season as long as that plant doesn't go through a transplant shock like cucumbers normally would. So you can, start it inside. This is especially true if you want to like for tomatoes, because tomatoes are actually going to be growing for like 8 weeks inside, whether that's a greenhouse or inside your house, or, you know, someone else's greenhouse first. And so those 8 weeks are actually very critical to getting tomatoes at a reasonable time in Colorado, which is generally not until mid-August anyways, the first harvest. So, and when I said Solanaceae or solanums are the plant family of tomatoes. Peppers and eggplant are also in that category. And then brassicas like kale, and broccoli, you just also get a jump start on the growing season. You grow those for 4 weeks inside, and so you can plant them outside before, you know, when the weather is good enough outside, which is for those mid-April. But you've already had them growing well for 4 weeks. But if you had planted them outside in mid-March, they may or may not have even started to germinate by then because of how cold the soil is outside. Another reason to plant something outside is because of weed pressure. So I went over that with cucumbers. They're so big. Those seeds are really big. Their first true leaves are big. They're able to shade out weeds very quickly, and you're able to see that plant very easily right away. With lettuce and kale and basil, they're smaller, and they a lot of times weeds will actually even germinate first. Weeds have this way of germinating very quickly. And so they'll start first, and you won't be able to see as well what you wanted to plant. And so like with something like lettuce, which you can, especially baby lettuce, like sometimes I do direct seed that, but it's just so much easier for the plant if you give it a head start for outcompeting those weeds. Another reason to plant a seedling is because you can stay organized really easily. You planted a plant, not a little seed, so you know exactly where it was. You don't have to worry about like where it's going to germinate or not germinate. So spacing wise, you know, and you don't have to thin, like you're just planting what you want in your garden. It's easier to start something inside because it's easier to keep the moisture level even in a small space than out in your garden. And that's really important for germination. And we'll go into what that water level is. And some plants like parsley or snapdragons just seem to take so long to germinate that you're definitely going to get more weeds. Like the amount of time that you're trying to keep that seed bed wet outside, you're going to get a bunch of weeds germinating versus having that, you know, the parsley, even at good soil temperatures, is still going to take like 10 days to germinate. And right now, if you were to plant seeds outside for parsley, it would be like 3 weeks, I think, before you'd see anything. Carrots too, a lot of things in that family. So that's carrots, and dill actually is quicker to germinate, but carrots and parsley and parsnips all take a long time to germinate. And so you have to keep that seed bed evenly moist for a much longer period of time. But the reasons why you would want, sorry you guys that I have to jump around. It's like confusing where my cursor is on my screen. But you want to direct seed something. Some things you have to direct seed. So if you're growing a root, roots are inherently going to be too disturbed if you transplant them, because what you want is that root, and so you do not want the root to be disturbed. So carrots and turnips and beets. Some people actually will transplant a beet, but it's not, I don't think it's necessary. Those you definitely want to direct seed and shouldn't ever start with a seedling. And then we talked about the transplant chalk. So cucurbits, like garden centers do sell cucumbers and squashes. And for all of the reasons that we talked about why to plant a seedling, you could plant a cucumber or a squash seedling instead of a seed. Keeping the seed bed moist, knowing where your plants are, that sort of thing. but you don't have to. It's nicer to plant to me, it's nicer to plant a seed. It's cheaper. And then you're not wasting space, especially if you're doing it yourself inside. And so that gets us to the second thing. What do you have space for if you're going to do this yourself, or what do you not want to spend money on if you're going to buy it from a garden shop? So what's fine to direct seed outside. So a few things I'll go back and forth with. Baby lettuce germinates very quickly. So do baby brassicas, like mustard greens. Baby spinach, if the soil temperature is high enough, will also be fine. And then things with bigger seeds, like zinnias and sunflowers. So those have bigger seeds, which means that their cotyledons, those first leaves that come out of the seed, are fairly big, and they're going to be easy to see and and they'll compete better with the weeds. So zinnias, sunflowers are like that, and then sugar snap peas and green beans, actually. So those both are very good to direct seed. But you could also, for all of those, you could also actually plant to start, and it's probably and it's fine. Okay, so my spreadsheet. I have to do a new share on this Zoom call. Oh wait, no, before my spreadsheet. This is one of those times where I wanted to pause for questions.
All right, Becca, there is a question from the chat. In terms of direct seeding, would you recommend direct seeding a watermelon radish, or is that something that's okay to start?
Yeah, so watermelon radish is in that root category. And so you should definitely direct seed that. And radishes germinate and grow very quickly. So they're normally like pretty easy to direct seed. Beets germinate a little bit slower, but they grow then fairly quickly. You do always have to thin them, because a beet and chard, even if you just plant one seed, you get multiple little seedlings coming up. I think the way that the seeds evolve to be, there's more than one plant in there. So beets you'll always have to thin. And then carrots are the hardest root to get because they take a longer time to germinate, and so you need to keep that seed bed at a more, even moisture for longer.
Becca, I have a question.
Yeah.
In terms of knowing how many seeds to plant at once, if you're direct seeding, do you generally recommend just following what the seed packet says, or is there ever a time where it may say to plant 2 seeds directly and you're just like, nah, this is gonna germinate, I'm just gonna plant 1, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, that's interesting. So if your seed packet is from the first year, I err on the side of, it depends on how big your space is. I have a big enough space that I err on the side of not wanting to thin. So I'm only going to plant 1 cucumber seed per foot when the seed packet is new. Now, as the seeds get older, I'll plant 2 per feet and thin the ones that don't germinate, because each, actually I'll send you guys links to these documents too. You can find how long seeds are good for. So some seeds are good for 5 years and some seeds are only good for 3 years. And so you can sort of make a decision based on that. But for things, even carrots, as I've mentioned, I think carrots are hard to get to germinate well, because you have to keep such an even seed bed moisture level. And so carrots, I always do the recommendation and then go and thin them. Did that answer it pretty well?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Any other questions? Cool. All right. So we're going to move on to my Excel. All right. So this is my veggie planting guide for for Boulder, Colorado. And what I use, like a general cheat sheet. So the plant family is in the far left corner, and I think about plants, as you probably have already heard, by what family they're in, because they generally need similar things. So, it has the vegetable. Here's the first plant date outside. That May 15th date, I actually haven't updated yet. I think my new date is May 22nd. I may update that before I send it out to you guys. The last, 3 out of the last 4 years or something, we have had a storm even after Mother's Day, which used to be people's date for planting things like tomatoes and cucumbers and things that couldn't go outside when it's cold. They can't freeze. So just waiting till Memorial Day for those things here in Boulder, Colorado, beautiful sunny Colorado, is probably better with our climate having more fluctuations. Then I have this succession. Well, so the last plant date is if you can plant them more than once, which I'm going to be going into a lot more. You'll get all this information, but in the next class, which is in I think 2 weeks, about 2 weeks, of getting the most harvest from your garden. So that's those two columns refer to those topics. The seeding. So here is where I wrote from a start or if you're supposed to direct seed it. So cucumbers, I would say to direct seed them. Tomatoes, I would say to plant a seedling. And then if you go down, so here, mustard greens, either one. And so that'll, keep going. Spinach, either one. Baby lettuce, either, that sort of thing. Sunflower zinnias. And then I have, if you want to do this yourself, inside, about how long you're going to need to grow the plant before you move it outside. So that's about how long it should be in your house. And then there's going to need to be a period of hardening off, which I'll go into a bit. And then you can plant it in your garden. So that's where the information is there for each plant. There's a cheat sheet on harvest information. And then I filled out this column of just my favorite varieties. I keep getting questions like, what's your favorite tomato variety? What should I be buying for cucumbers? Because there are so many seed options. I think in general, what I look for, the two qualities that as someone who, I don't grow commercially. We have a larger garden / small farm setup at the JCC, but we're growing for donation. So we don't grow, and in my backyard, I'm not growing commercially. So I'm looking for flavor. So in some descriptions of plants, it says the yield is blah, blah, blah. And that's what it says. As a backyard gardener, you don't want to pick a plant because of yield. You want to pick a plant because of flavor. You want to pick something that is going to be harder to find in the store. You don't have to look for a tomato that has thick skin for shipping. You can look for a tomato that won the taste test in 2015, for that particular seed company, something like that. The other thing that I'm looking for in a description or just in a seed packet is the days to maturity. So that's often just abbreviated as DTM. And that's how long it takes from when it's in the ground till when you can harvest. Days to maturity, you should know, goes on what is the normal way to plant it. So a tomato's days to maturity is from when you plant a seedling into the ground, not a seed in your house. But a cucumber's days to maturity is when you direct seed that cucumber. So whatever the preferred way of starting that plant is in your garden, that's what that days to maturity will refer to. And I pick short days to maturity, one, because I want to get more yummy food quicker. But two, we have a really short growing season here. There are other places, especially on the East Coast, that you wouldn't necessarily plant a tomato until Mother's Day, but you're not going to get first frost until mid-October or the end of October. In Boston, like I think we were, it's in the city, but in our urban garden, we had tomatoes through almost, I think, like mid-November, because it just doesn't, the fluctuations are different there. So that short days to maturity, especially for tender vegetables, is important here in Boulder. Okay, what are the questions? Anyone have questions? All right, I see Vicky said, would you recommend using a cold frame? Things to extend the growing season are awesome. I don't have any, I have never used a cold frame. So I don't totally know if I would recommend it here in Boulder or not. I really, really like a mid-weight row cover. It's also called Agribon or Rime are the two other names that goes by. It's not like a plastic, basically has more airflow. Here in Colorado, our temperature fluctuations are so quick. Today it's like, what is it, 65 out? I was out in a tank top at the farm this morning, and tomorrow we're going to get snow. So that cold frame is going to be great in that snow. But today, and it's only April 1st, the temperature is going to get really hot. So it's hard to regulate, especially those plants that want a cooler temperatures to grow, which is what you want to plant on your edge seasons. Like right now, we planted actually kale and spinach outside today. We planted them under a row cover. So that row cover just has better airflow, while it's still the thickness that I like is 8 degrees. So you'll see it sold by how many degrees of warmth it offers. And the 8 degrees doesn't seem to get too hot underneath. I had kale underneath my row cover last year until I think like July 1st. And it was under that thick of a row cover, and it did so well. It helps just keep things warmer and moister. So the plants stay out of the elements a bit and can grow better. And so for us this year at Milk and Honey, we probably will plant our tomatoes outside on May 15th, but actually underneath row cover, just in case we get a stupid late storm again. And you need to take that row cover off once the plants need to pollinate. But things that like it really warm, the row cover keeps it nice and warm for its initial growth. And then and so they'll grow faster until you need to take it off so that a plant can get pollinated, or if it's going to really get too hot. Molly, I think I saw a notification that you raised your hand.
I did, yes. Would you mind repeating the names of the row cover that you like?
Yeah.
Degrees.
Well, so it's known by Rime or Agribon, are like the two names that it goes by. And the degrees, I like the 8 degree one. So it doesn't let as much sunlight through. That's the warmer it is, the less sunlight goes through. But the really thin one is, as Molly knows, just rips so easily. And so that 8 degrees seems to be a nice one. You can use it over and over again.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. The other reason to use it, because I know actually I had a question about pests that came in before, but if you cover something with row cover when you first plant it out, the pests can't find it. It's like as long as you make it flush with the ground. So if you do have a pest issue, like actually your early season plantings for mustard greens or radishes or turnips here or arugula, most places I think in North America, but for sure in Boulder, there are flea beetles that will like come right away. But if you put that row cover on, they can't find them as long as, again, it's flush to the ground. You have to take the row cover off if the plant needs to be pollinated. So peppers, tomatoes actually self-pollinate, but you have to trellis them at some point, so you have to take it off. And then cucumbers and squash, those keep that row cover on. It helps keep the seed bed moist outside. It helps with growth, and then you can take it off once you start to see flowers that need to be pollinated for those fruits. What else? Anyone else? All right, so now the presentation is gonna transition to, if you're growing your own seedlings inside, what to keep, like what to look for. And I have a bunch of videos on different aspects. So, okay, can everyone, I guess, raise your hand or write in the chat box if you don't see my Google presentation again. All right, it seems like we successfully did that. So I'm going to show now a video of seed starting at Milk and Honey Farm, and then a video after that of what it looks like right now in my dad's basement, which is not a lot going on, but we have some things, so you can see that setup. Oops. Play. So this is the seed starting setup that we have at the JCC greenhouse. You can see we use our vertical space. It's up on a ladder here, hanging. And we use these trays called Seedling trays. They are polystyrene, which isn't the greatest material for the earth, but they last a really long time and they're really easy to use on a farm scale. At home, you're probably not going to use these trays, though you can, and they sell them through certain gardening supply catalogs. You can see in my trays, I label everything with little sticks. I use a pencil to label because you can water over a pencil and it doesn't bleed at all. And I put at least one date on the tray, that's the date that I seed. And then all of these are tomatoes, and I know that, so those were not labeled with tomato. But normally, here, if we come over to the broccoli and the cabbage, you'll see I write the name of the plant and then the variety. You can also, on the back of the popsicle stick, write the seed catalog and the year that the seed was from, in case you want to track whether or not your seed packets are good. But I'm actually going to show you another way to test that before the season even gets started. I just remembered that I was going to add that to the presentation, the seed testing your seed packet. I think what I want to say about this video is that if you are using sunlight, like we do in Milk and Honey Farm, you need at least 12 hours, which I'll go into later. Especially those timings that I put on that spreadsheet, you need at least 12 to 16 hours of light a day. It can be lights, which is in the next video. But someone remind me if I forget, if you want to know about testing your seed packets, and if you have an old seed packet, you can test the seed viability and how to do that. We'll make sure to go into that. All right, so here's our basement setup. So this is a setup with no natural light, and we get really great seedling growth here. So here's the video. So this is a video of the basement seed starting setup that we have. You'll notice this is a big, this plastic outside is actually like a flood and drain bed for hydroponics, but that's just so that we can water our starts without getting the whole basement wet. You can really have any sort of tub, just as long as what's important with that is that you can water your pots enough so that the water goes all the way through the pot and out, because that's an important aspect of watering. And then there's, you know, the tray. It's up on stilts because we want the water to be able to go down and out and have a little bit of air underneath, and that will air prune the roots on the bottom so that they don't try and go out from under the tray. And I really want to show you guys these lights. So you can buy, the reason why this video looks a little pink is because this light is a somewhat expensive grow light that you would use if you were really wanting adult plants inside. So those are LED grow lights. There's that one and then that one. But I want to show you, oh, here's a little demo here of what it looks like underneath. You don't need something this strong for starting seeds. So this is a shop light with fluorescent lights in it, and this will start your seedlings just fine. Underneath it though, it's a little tough to see in this video. Oh no, you can see it. There's one warm spectrum and one cool spectrum bulb, fluorescent bulb in there. And if you do a warm and a cool spectrum fluorescent bulb, you get enough of the spectrum that those seedlings are going to be great for, like, you know, until they're 2 to 4 inches tall. That is all the light that they need. And those set up, that's like, you know, shop light and some fluorescent bulbs. I think it's like 10 bucks. And then we just rigged it up so that it hangs. We have it hanging from the ceiling, all these lights. But you don't necessarily, you know, you can rig up whatever setup works for you. But I would say even if you have a sunny window, I would see if you can add one of these shop lights to your window, because then you can turn it on, and you'll be able to make sure that you get that 12 to 16 hours of light a day. And all these lights are on a timer, so they go into one, you know, if you have a setup that's this big, you'd have all those lights going into a power strip, and then that power strip is on a timer. All right, so we've got about 15 minutes left, but I'm hoping that I won't talk for that many more minutes, so that you guys can ask your questions. So those were 2 different videos of different ways to set that up. But I want to go into now, like, what is it that those plants need in the different setups? So sun. A lot of times a sunny window is not necessarily enough light, because you want at least 12 hours, and 16 hours is really nicer of light on your plants a day. I showed this picture. You can get this at Gardener's Supply. It's pretty expensive, but you can see it's actually just shelves. If you have like a gorilla shelf set up and you can put those shop lights on the shelves, you can get that pretty easily. And then you just need to protect the floor so that you can water well. For soil, and I'll just go, there's a thing that we sing with the kids: sun, soil, water, air. Everything we eat and everything we wear comes from sun, soil, water, and air. And so I'm just going to go through those requirements for plants because that's what they require. So soil, I always use this black gold potting mix and find it really lovely for starting seeds inside. That being said, once the cotyledons come out and you're starting to get the true leaf growth, I fertilize every Friday, once a week. We call it Fertigation Fridays to remember. When you're looking, if you can see in that picture, there's 0.0500 on there, and fertilizers also will have 3 numbers. It's a nitrogen, of phosphorus, and a potassium number. For starts, for seedlings that you grow inside, you want to pick something that has a high nitrogen, and you don't need a lot of phosphorus or potassium. Those 2 nutrients are good later on in a plant's growth. But you're really looking for green growth, which is governed by nitrogen. Fish emulsion is a very common liquid, like to add to your watering can to fertilize. That's what fertigation means, like you're fertilizing in your water. We use an age-old organic, or it's called age-old, especially if you're inside. Fish emulsion smells very bad. Age-old is not organically certified, but the ingredients are pretty good and it doesn't have that same smell. So that's sort of in the like soil and nutrients category. Watering, I have a video on because I wanted to show you how much to water. So I'll play this video.
So this is our tray of, there's a bunch of brassicas here, cabbages, broccolis is what we're planting. I want to show you a concept called dry down. So one of the most important things when you are watering your starts is to not overwater. And the way that I judge whether or not it's time to water is to see how many cells are actually dry at the top. So you can see those cells, that cell with the two, that cell is dry, that cell is dry, that cell is still wet on the top, that cell is still wet. When you're trying to get a tray of seeds to germinate, so things aren't up yet, you want to try and look for about a quarter of the cells, or a quarter of whatever you have planted is dry. So it's a quarter dry down. Once you have little sprouts like this, I'm not going to water unless I see half dry down. So you can let the trays get a little bit drier. And these are probably, I don't know how good the light is on that video, but these trays are basically still wet. There's a few cells that are dry, but it is not time to water these yet. So yeah, so once you have little sprouts like this, you wait till at least half the top of the soil is dry. And then once they're bigger and you're hardening them off, so I'll span over here. So see those bigger ones? I'm gonna try and harden them off. I wanna wait till all of the soil, or almost all of it, is dry on the top before I water. Now, dry on the top does not mean that it's all the way dry. So that's an important distinction. You're not waiting for all the soil to be dry, but it's just that top of the soil. And that's important. It's important to let the tops of the soil dry out when you're starting seeds, so that you make sure that there's still enough air inside the soil for the plant's roots, and because it prevents algae growth. So if you keep your soil wet all the time on the top, you'll likely get a layer of algae. And the algae, there are these little fungus gnats that start to grow, and especially with crops that are sensitive to it, I'm
actually pausing the video because our next video is on that and it's a little bit better. Before we move on though to letting things dry out, so that's for seedlings, our air component, because we're not really, I mean, you need photosynthesis to happen, so you need airflow and enough carbon dioxide in your space. But I just want to say, with that dry down concept, if you're trying to get seeds to germinate outside, it's the same thing, which is why it's harder to get things to germinate outside, because you need to keep that much larger area dry, or wet at that moisture level to get the germination, and then you can sort of water things less often. All right, here's that video on algae growth.
So this parsley in this tray has been in this tray for quite a while, and we have a little bit of algae growth, which I wanted to show you. See the green tinge there? So it either looks green or some of it looks shiny black. See this slightly shiny black here and here. Now that algae growth is probably caused by two things. One, watering maybe a little bit too often, and two, we fertilize every week. But if we fertilize and then water again and don't give the plants time, or don't give that soil time to dry down, then you get that algae growth. If you get this algae growth, one thing that you can do is take your little, I end up just taking the plant, you know, marker and going like this. Because one of the things about the algae growth is that it doesn't let water penetrate because it wants to suck up all the water itself. And then of course it breeds those fungus gnats, which can cause damping off, where the stem gets really thin and won't suck up the water as well. You can just take a fork or take the bottom of this, break up that crust if you start to get that happening. Not ideal, but not the end of the world either.
All right, it's 3:20 and I want to give a chance for questions, and I also have a video on the concept of hardening off. Can people just write in the chat box, do you want to see that video on hardening off and then ask questions, or do you just want to go for questions right away? If you care. Hardening off is the concept of knowing when your start is ready to plant outside. What do you do? All right, we've got a request for the video. All right, well, if it starts getting boring, we'll stop it. It's 3 minutes.
So this is a tray of starts that is definitely ready to plant outside. They're a little past even, they're a little big. I want to show you, they're outside because we're hardening them off. So if you start your starts indoors, especially if they're under lights, it's really easy for them to get sunburnt with the strength of the actual sun. So the way that you can try and avoid that is the first day, put them out for 4 hours in the direct sunlight, bring them back inside. Second day, maybe also 4 hours. Third and fourth day, 6 hours. Fifth and sixth day, 8 hours. Seventh, eighth day-ish, full day. And then you'll likely avoid them getting sunburnt, and they'll also start, it's called hardening off because the plants themselves start to form an extra layer of it's called cutin. It's the same material that our fingernails are made out of, I think. And the leaves themselves get much harder, and so, hence hardening off. But they get stronger against the wind and against the weather and all that. And the way that you can tell, this is, I want to show you this root ball. Let's see if I can get some better light. So did you see how that kale came straight out of its start, and that root ball is really well formed? It's slightly too many roots, but you know that your plants are big enough to harden off when you can just sort of pull them out of their tray, whatever it is that you're growing them in, and they keep that root ball. So let's look at this chamomile. So this chamomile broke off. So it was slightly young, and you can see that the roots, doesn't have as many roots around it. It's nice to have that full root ball so that those roots are lower into the ground when they start, so that they're able to get more moisture and more nutrients from deep in the soil, and their roots are able to find water and survive better. But that being said, as long as you watch that chamomile and make sure it gets water when you first plant it out, that start's going to be fine. So there's that tray of starts that are ready for the ground. You can see this is charred. Yeah, they're a little chart is a little old there. That little.
Sweet. Let's do, there's another program, another JCC program starting in 5 minutes that needs this account. So let's take questions. Any questions in the chat box?
Becca, we have a question. Though now that I'm reading it, I don't know if it's a complete, there we go. Why do you think this person's radishes frequently don't beef up, so to speak?
Two things with radishes. One, you have to thin them. You don't necessarily have to, but you normally do for radishes, or else their roots won't beef up, get big. And then the other reason could be that radishes are really heat sensitive. So I have loads of trouble with radishes because it gets too hot. They'll get heat shock and want to bolt, which means going to seed before they form that nice big root. So that's what I blame not getting good radishes on. If you want something like a radish that's much easier to grow, go for the Hakurei turnips. It's a white Japanese, like fresh eating turnip, and it's so sweet, and it's sort of like a radish because you eat it fresh, and it's basically doesn't bolt. So it's much easier to grow. The Easter egg radishes too often do a little bit better, whatever that mix is, when you find like an Easter egg mix. Okay, I see another question. Where do you recommend purchasing seeds? So this is thanks for asking it, Alyssa. I looked at my 2 favorite places to order seeds from this morning to see what's happening with COVID-19. Neither of them are accepting new orders. Under normal circumstances, I would say Johnny's Seed Company has a lot of really nice varieties, both heirloom and hybrid varieties. They're based out of Maine. And then Seed Savers Exchange has only like heirloom and open pollinated varieties. And I have loved the heirloom varieties that I have gotten from them, or that like they've sent me free seed packets. This year, right now, neither of them are taking orders from a non-commercial grower. So there are likely other seed companies to look at online, though they all have shipping delays that I've looked at so far. So I would say like go to McGuckin. If it's like I need seeds in the next month, either go inside McGuckin. I don't know what they're doing with like curbside pickup and seeds and how you would manage that, but McGuckin is doing curbside pickup. All right, we have time for maybe one more question. Anyone else? All right. Well, you guys, feel free to email me your questions. I will email you out that spreadsheet, and I'll also email you out the list of like how long seeds are good for if you buy seed packets. So, you don't have to buy every seed every year. So I'll send you everyone who registered both those things and the recording of this. Thank you so much for joining, and I wish you luck with your garden this year and lots of time to be at home with your plants. It's an advantage of being at home. All right, bye everyone.